Awesome. Wow. Okay, this is a very exciting and unexpected turnout. Thank you, everybody who came. Who knew that so many people were heat pump curious in this community? Hopefully, we can satisfy your curiosity tonight. My name is Satchel, and I'm one of the organizers for Cookin' Like Keeper. And we are here in Homer tonight. And Homer is the traditional lands of the Supiaq and Dena'ina people, and they've stewarded this land for many, many, many years. And tonight we are gathering here to learn how we can be a little bit better stewards in a very specific way, which is making our homes and buildings slightly more energy efficient and reducing our individual and community-wide carbon footprint by using heat pumps. So I'll just briefly share for folks in the room who are unfamiliar with Cook Inlet Keeper, we have been serving the communities of Cook Inlet for nearly 30 years. Our 30th anniversary is next year. And our mission is to protect the Cook Inlet watershed and the life it sustains. And whether or through our programs of supporting the energy transition, protecting salmon habitat and clean water, or supporting local solutions that really build community resiliency, climate change is sort of overlaying them all and really creating a context with which we work. And Homer Drawdown was born out of this shared community sense that climate change is this big existential crisis, but we really want to localize it and get together and do something about it. So that shared sentiment brought together some really wonderful community volunteers and leaders to create this program called Homer Drawdown, which is really a democratic and community-led climate solutions group. And Homer Drawdown is the official host of the event tonight. We are working on a project called Climate Smart Homes. And each year or so, this community, which I invite you all to be part of, gets together and democratically selects a climate solution to work on locally in Homer. And so this year with our Climate Smart Home program, we're really working to spur energy efficiency improvements to lower our carbon footprints and hopefully also our heating bills. So that's kind of the reason that we have brought this event together tonight. And we're really excited to dig into heat pumps. They're a highly efficient home heating system that has many pros, some cons. We'll talk about all of them. And really, I have a slew of really informed and exciting presenters that I want to give the mic to right away. So that being said, I'm going to introduce our presenters. I will actually pause. I just want to give you the lay of the land, flow of the evening. Today we're going to cover the basic topics that you want to know about. We'll talk about what a heat pump is, the benefits of installing a heat pump, kind of how you decide what heat pump is right for you and if a heat pump is right for you. We'll pause around there to have like a brief question break for 10 minutes. And then we'll get into some of the more exciting details you might be wondering, like how much does a heat pump cost? Are there rebate programs available to help me pay for a heat pump? And we'll hear some local testimonials as well. So that's kind of what we've got on the agenda for the evening, and we'll have more questions afterwards. I've asked our presenters to keep it pretty tight so that we can spend a lot of time on questions, because I know you have many. So without further ado, I'll just share the lineup for the evening. We've got Andy Romanoff. He is the director of Alaska Heat Smart. He came up from Juneau to talk to us tonight. In Alaska Heat Smart, he's going to share the scope of what they do, but they've certainly been making big waves in terms of getting heat pumps installed in homes in Southeast and are excited to be coming up to focus on Katchmic Bay for a while. And we've got local installers, Andy Lorentz and Randy Arndt. And so they'll talk about specifically their lanes in the installation world and what they've experienced here locally. And we've got Erin, who is our esteemed HEA board member and who has really advocated strongly for the HEA heat pump rebate program, which is, we got secured for another cycle. So give Erin some major props for that. And yeah, so we've got Andy, Randy, and Erin coming at you here pretty soon, and I'm going to pass the mic to them, starting with Andy R.
Thanks, Satchel.
To move through.
My press.
I'm saying you might also be able to do this. How about you cue me?
All these little details. Hi, great to be here. Satchel kind of set a high bar by calling us exciting presenters. So I don't know if I'll achieve that, but hopefully the subject matter itself is exciting enough. Yeah, sure. How's that? Is that better? It's not on. I can hear. I think it. How's that? Okay, I just need to get really close to it. Almost drooling on it. So this is super exciting. Yeah, if you want me to speak louder, just raise your hand. And so there's a lot of hands going up. I don't know if we have a volume control on this thing, maybe. I think we need our soundboard manager to kick in here. And she's at it for sure. Closely. Okay. Anyhow, hopefully you can hear. We do have a few seats closer up if people wanted to move up closer to the front. Oh, we have another mic too. I get to hold two of them. Oh. Just one. Is that any better? No. Interesting. Okay, I'll just keep blathering on as they adjust the soundboard here. She doesn't have the power. Okay, well, we got a seat here maybe and a couple up here if you want to come closer. But I'll do my best. Anyhow, thank you for being here, and I'm excited to be here. It's actually my first time in Homer after 35 years or so in Alaska. So I'm excited to be here and excited to be talking about heat pumps with you folks. Can you advance? Yeah, I think it's pretty loud now, maybe. Okay, so I'm the executive director of Alaska Heat Smart, nonprofit. Started in 2019 down in Juneau, and our mission essentially is to is to help homeowners save money on home heating or on their space heating of any kind, business or home, and to embrace weatherization, energy efficiency, heat pump adoption via our, often abundant renewable energy resources. Of course, in Southeast, where I hail from, a lot of hydropower. I know up here it's a different mix. It's a little bit of hydro, a little bit of wind, a little bit of solar, a lot of natural gas. But these things are changing fairly rapidly. They may be changing more rapidly than some are ready for. But in short, what Alaska Heat Smart does is help you, the homeowner, figure out how you can make your home cost less to live in, and help you find ways to help maybe pay for that. So we have a pile of programs that seek to meet these ends. Our kind of core program is one that will be touched on a little bit throughout the night, and that's what we call our home energy assessment program. And we'll actually be bringing this up here to the Bay over the next few years, hopefully within a few months. And essentially, it's a program that analyzes your home energy use and your behavior in your home and helps you determine what you need to work with your existing heating system, for adding a heat pump. How can I add a heat pump to my boiler, my furnace, my wood stove, my electric resistance heating system, and make it work? What's going to work for me? That program helps inform you about that, kind of puts you in the driver's seat, so to speak. We have a number of lower income programs that either do full energy retrofits for a lower income home or provide incentive money to help make it easier to get over the high cost of installing a heat pump. And we have another program, the Alaska Carbon Reduction Fund, which gathers private funds and puts heat pumps in completely in lower income family homes. And then we have a new statewide program which serves nonprofit buildings across Alaska, which helps to retrofit between roughly 25 different nonprofit buildings in the health and housing sectors. And so that's a big new program that we're getting going. We're going to skip over these. This is our new program, which we're going to be bringing up here, which we'll get to in a little bit when we move back to the rebate section. But we're really excited about our ACES program, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. So why heat pumps? Some of you may have a heat pump. Some of you may know about heat pumps. All kinds of reasons why heat pumps are often a no-brainer for people. Maritime climate, granted it's a lot colder up here than where I live, but we do get days that are 12 degrees or so, but not that many. But a good cold climate heat pump will work down to 50% efficiency at about -13 Fahrenheit. So you can work in pretty cold temperatures with these devices. Often in our communities, Homer included, the cost of electricity is fairly low compared to national averages. I think it's about 26 cents a kilowatt hour here, which isn't that bad. If you're an oil burning home, 26 cents, compared to the BTUs between a kilowatt hour of electricity and a gallon of oil, it does save money if you're just going electric, especially if your home is efficient and fairly tight. We can jump ahead one more. So one reason the heat pumps are exciting to me and to many in Southeast and more in South Central is this kind of thing, which is the rest of the world, right? We are way behind the curve. These things are everywhere outside of the United States. This is in Malaysia, and I think there's like 102 heat pumps hanging off this building in this picture. So one example of how in so many other countries, granted, they were probably using them for air conditioning, not heating in Malaysia, but these things are all over the place. And same with this picture, which is Croatia. So I took this from a bike ride a couple of years ago, and I circled all the heat pumps on these little old 800 to 900-year-old buildings, and they're absolutely everywhere in these places where you just wouldn't expect to see them. It's kind of ironic because in Alaska, we've got these constraints on historic buildings. So anything pre-1978 is considered potentially historic, and you have to be really careful about how you apply federal money to putting heat pumps on buildings. And so I was over there and I took all these pictures and I thought, I need to send these to the State Historical Preservation Office because this is crazy. These buildings are so old and they're covered with heat pumps. But anyhow, so we're playing catch up. And, in a natural gas place like the rail belt, kind of exciting to see that in 2022, that heat pump sales outpaced gas furnace sales for the first time. And I don't have any details for this year or last year, but I think the trend has increased even more, and that the shift is happening as gas prices increase, heat pumps become more attractive. Who knows what's going to happen out there in Cook Inlet? I don't have a crystal ball, but we've all heard predictions and forecasts. None of them are all that encouraging in terms of prices, and so that balance could shift even more towards something like a heat pump over gas, for all the gas burners in this area. So again, why heat pumps? Just a few things about heat pumps and how they work and what they do. They don't make heat like burning something, burning oil, burning gas. You're making heat from something else. A heat pump just moves the heat. And it's a beautiful thing. So if you had a heat pump hanging off the wall out here and the air handler here inside, you're pulling thermal energy from outside the wall. You're not pulling it from the burning of oil, which traveled to Homer on a barge, which came from a refinery in the Pacific Northwest, which maybe was sourced by a tanker from Valdez after the oil flowed down the pipeline from the North Slope, basically a 3,000-mile journey to get your heat to your living room instead of just pulling it from the other side of the wall. So oil burning, gas burning, at best, 75, 80, 85% efficient. A lot of the resources going to waste heat up the stack, to noise, emissions. Heat pump can be up to 300% efficient because it's just moving heat. It's taking heat from outside, moving it inside. So you're not, so it's really low cost, low energy required to move the heat as opposed to making the heat. Depending upon your existing fuel source for your home, you can save anywhere from say 20 to 80%. I'm changing those numbers right now. I have a heat pump in my house. I was burning oil. I'm saving 75% off my heating bills. I'm saving $1,500 a year. It costs me $500 a year to heat my house. 1,550 square feet, 2 stories, one small heat pump that costs $6,000. So it paid for itself in 4 years, and now it's just all gravy. For many, it's clean. Obviously, it's clean in the sense that, well, if you're 100% hydro, it's really clean. So I don't want to brag too much about that, but I get to enjoy that benefit where I switch from oil to pure rain power, and so I heat with rain power. But here, as the grid's changing, I understand Homer's going to get a lot more potential solar power tied into the grid. Erin can maybe touch on that at some point if need be. The grids are greening slowly, maybe faster and faster as cook inlet dynamics change with the gas. But it's an ever-changing industry and ever-changing fuel mix, and seems to be getting better and better and better. Heat pumps, of course, support local labor, local contractors, local utilities. And we're going to touch on this more later, but there is quite a bit of financial support to help people get over the upfront costs. So there's a couple different kinds of heat pumps. Really briefly, for those who need more information on this, this is the most common kind. Essentially, here's your fancy house. I don't know if there's a pointer anywhere. I'm just going to walk in front of it. You've got the outside piece that's grabbing the thermal energy from the air, and it moves that heat with a fan and a compression cycle into basically an air conditioning type unit that hangs on the wall, or it sits on the floor. Mine sits on the floor. It's like right down here. It looks like a diesel stove, looks like a monitor stove, but sleeker and more futuristic looking. And essentially, I took out a monitor stove and I put in a floor-mounted heat pump. That's all I have. So this thing grabs the heat and moves into your house. In this case, you've got 2 of them. You can have up to 8 on some of these systems, which becomes extremely inefficient, and they don't work very well in the cold. So I don't recommend that. But 1, 2, and 3 can work really well. So the most common kind. I don't know about here, but in a lot of Southeast where you have furnaces, not natural gas, but a diesel furnace. You'll have ducting throughout the home. I assume there's a lot of natural gas furnaces. I think there are up in Anchorage and whatnot. So you've got this existing ductwork in your house, and you can actually have a heat pump tie into that and have a whole home solution where your heat's being pumped throughout the home. So it meets all your code requirements, warms all your rooms. And the same idea, pulls the heat from outside, moves it in through the fan system, up top there. You can see the air handlers up in the attic or in the crawl space or somewhere. And then it pushes the air through all the ducting around the home. A little harder to regulate temperatures room to room, but a pretty common and efficient system. And then the more expensive, but very, very functional and kind of exciting system, the ground source heat pump, which is actually pulling heat out of the earth. This shows 2 ideas. One, you can have wells that can go down quite far. I think Randy is the expert in the room, perhaps, on this. Deep wells that have a refrigerant in them that pull heat out of the earth, into the hundreds of feet. What's the deepest you've gone?
I do 100 foot.
100 foot. Okay. And then you can also have a field sort of up in a flatter area, like under an airport parking lot or in your yard. If you have a big yard, you can have them just a certain distance under. So obviously it's very invasive. It's a big project, big process, but these things are not subject to changing air temperatures. The ground temperature tends to be fairly steady, and you can pull heat out all year at a very regular rate. But they tend to be more expensive up front. And so these are the questions we get all the time. These are the important questions. Is it going to work for me? What do I need? What is going to work for me? And how much is it going to cost me? And how much is it going to save me? And that's a lot of what Alaska Heat Smart does, is trying to answer those questions for you. We tend to not charge any money for that process. We tend to just give you the information. If you give us your utility info, we can give you that information. And so this guy, Ray here, is pretty happy to get his heat pump. He got it for free. And That's about as good as an incentive you can get, right? Ray, we're going to give you a free heat pump if you stop burning oil. You said yes. So, I don't know if we need this slide. This is what you may feel like when you go to 3 different contractors and you say, what do I need? And one says this, and one says that, and one says something else, and they all give you different prices and different layouts and scenarios, and you think, oh my gosh, no, forget it. Gas is working just fine, or oil is working just fine. I can't do this. And so that's a lot of why Alaska Heat Smart was formed, and a lot of why we have our home energy assessment program, is to get rid of the confusion and give you solid answers that say, yeah, this is what's going to work for your home. And now instead of calling a contractor and saying, yeah, I keep hearing about heat pumps. What do I need? What do I need to do? Now you can call the contractor and say, hey, Andy, I had this assessment. I understand I need like an 18K BTU Mitsubishi hyperheat unit. The outdoor unit can go here. The indoor unit can go here. Sounds like my panel's good. I've got enough power. I've got enough capacity for a 20 amp breaker. I'm good to go. What are you going to charge me? All right. So puts the homeowner in the driver's seat, gives you a lot of power and control and information, which is power and control. So I didn't get specific on this page, but all this information is here in this room, so we can share that at some point. I think I'll hand it over to someone at this point. I'm not sure who. Yeah. I'll hand it to Satchel because she's right here.
I'm going to bring up Erin, who can help us go a little deeper on assessing if a heat pump is right for your home. Erin's going to show a tool. I'm going to pull it up on the big screen called the heat pump calculator, which her and her associates have worked on.
Sure. And the heat pump calculator is made by Alan Mitchell, and I've helped him like modify a few little bits, but it's pretty much all him. And so he made this, there's, let's see, what's the actual web address of this? Heat Pump Analysis North. I'm sure Satchel can somehow share where you actually, like a link to it. And so as you go down, the first thing it's going to do is this is trying to figure out a few different things for you. It's trying to figure out both how much heat you need, and it's trying to figure out how much things are going to cost. And so they need to know your electric rate schedule, because that determines the price for the electricity for the heat pump. And then as you go down, you're getting all these questions about the building. This, like, does it have a garage? What's its wall construction? And those are the things that it's trying to figure out how much heat you need. So if you do this and the amount of the existing heat source it gives you is really wrong, then you've probably got estimated your, insulation level wrong. So that's kind of what those questions are for. And then they'll ask you what your existing fuel type is, and that's going to help figure out the cost comparison. So that's what that part's for. Maybe we should just put in some, Satchel, do you want to just put in some numbers here so we can see it spit something out? Sure. So, I don't know, give it like, 1,000 square feet, just some number. And it can, and give it a fuel type. We can keep the defaults, give it some, just go say like propane or something. And then you don't need to, you need to put the fuel price in for propane. Give it oil, because, or does somebody know what propane costs? Oil, it'll fill in itself, I think. If you do the other one, maybe number 2 there. Oh, it's not filling it in. Does it for me? Oh, it's because we didn't put the location in. Sorry about that. You got to go select Homer. Go select Homer and it'll fill it in. There you go. Then I think you can get, yeah, that'll work. So we'll just say we have the default kinds of furnace, but you can obviously change that. This part really matters if you're in a power cost equalization community, which you aren't if you live here, so you can ignore those things. Yeah. And here, this will it's trying to figure out whether you need one or more zones. So we'll just leave it on the defaults here. And this lets you, most of this stuff is going to do you get a rebate you can fill it in? Do you have a loan? Do you want to turn the heat pump on or off at certain times? And if you don't know, you can just come in and change those later and see how it changes the amount. This part's kind of trying to figure out if you can just have that one unit or not, because it's is it all exposed to the heat pump indoor units? And do you care if your bedroom is cold? And do you keep the doors open or closed? Sales tax, it filled in for you when you put the locations. And then you can hit calculate results. And so what it's going to give you is some economic things at the top. So, it says that, you get a rate of return of 4.5%, which this says isn't worth it by a little bit. And the calculation, you could have invested in something else. It tells you how much fuel you save and the efficiency of the heat pump and how much emissions you save too. And Andy didn't know the emissions numbers for here. In Juneau, they have all hydropower, so it's really straightforward. If you do the calculations for our area, you're basically going to get that a heat pump on our current grid is going to be slightly lower emissions than natural gas. And then, if you go from there, oil and propane are worse, and electric baseboard is a lot worse because you're not, you're just getting the electricity directly rather than with the heat pump. And then if you were to burn some beetle-killed spruce trees on a 20-year time scale, that's pretty much the worst thing you can possibly do. So it's still the best even with our current grid. Worse for the climate. So the economics is economics of firewood, who knows? How do you value your time? Economics of the calculator will tell you, but if you're just looking at the economics of the fuel for oil and propane on this side of the bay, you might or likely propane, you probably almost certainly would save money if you switch to a heat pump. Oil, likely, but it depends on the details. And if you're just using direct electric heat, you'll definitely save money. And if you're using natural gas, you won't. But things about the costs, I think, would be better with our installers. They could come up and give you the details on that.
Yeah, we're not going to talk quite yet about the cost, but I would like to invite our installers, doesn't matter which one, Andy or Randy, who would like to go first, to talk a little bit about the types of heat pumps that you're installing most often in this region and the benefits or drawbacks that you've experienced.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lorentz, or Andy. I'm a Soldovia Homer-based mini split or ductless heat pump installer. So I want to kind of build on what Andy was talking about, because I hear a lot of kind of reoccurring everyday questions about mini split heat pumps. So when I say mini split, a heat pump is a broad term, right? So we have a ground source, like a geothermal based heat pump. That has its own place. What Randy specializes in is more like a hydronic, like air to water type of heat pump. So homes with in-floor heat or radiant-based heating, that's a perfect fit. So what I focus on is air-to-air mini split heat pump, which is more refrigerant-based heating. And it tends to be more of a low-hanging fruit heat pump installs. So when you're hearing about all these heat pumps that's going in throughout the country, bulk of that tends to be mini splits. So just kind of building on what Andy was talking about, some of those questions, do they work, right? So answer is yes, but the sizing and selection of model of heat pumps will kind of determine how well they're going to perform, especially in cold climate region like Alaska, Homer, Alaska. So for new homes or full primary heat source for your home, you really should get a proper energy audit done. The whole point of that is try to get a design heat loss calculation performed by a certified energy auditor, and they can figure out, hey, how tight is your building envelope? How much insulation does your building have? And how much heat is escaping at what rate? So they're going to provide an adequate sizing. I tend to go 125% off their required sizing just for that little buffer. And for heat pump selection, you know, when you're researching heat pump options, you're going to see hundreds out there. And standard heat pumps are what I call, they're really not suitable for year-round primary use for this region, mainly because even though you see, hey, it's rated at 5 degrees, right? You're going to see efficiency and performance are tapering as temperatures get into teens, right? So the whole point of mini splits is that we want to take advantage of their efficiency. So really, the only type of heat pump that I'm really pushing for full-time use is cold climate heat pumps. So some of the features of cold climate heat pumps, they're going to be rated to -15 or lower, right? So they're saying cold climate heat pumps, when the temperatures get down to, let's say, 5 degrees, it can still kick out 100% of its rated heat output versus non-cold climate heat pump, which is a standard model. It says, hey, we can still operate down to 5, but maybe around like 20 degrees or 25 degrees based on its capacity, right? That you're going to have a reduced heat output and efficiency. So that's going to start plummeting way sooner. So cold climate heat pumps is really the only way to go here. And besides having oversized compressor, right, and large heat exchanger to really ramp up when the temperature gets cold, right, versus standard heat pumps, it's going to want to bog down. So we really need a cold climate that can really respond to those cold stretches. It's going to also have some accessory items built in, like a base pan heater is a common in all cold climate heat pumps. Essentially, it's a heater that's mounted to the outside unit. And when the temperatures are getting cold or you're going to have some icing issues, it can sense that and basically prevent any ice formation, which can reduce the efficiency of the overall unit. So standard heat pumps will not have those accessory items. So, so sizing and working with the cold climate heat pumps, you know, can really is a right way to go for regions like this. Another factor when deciding type of heat pumps for mini splits is what they call heating seasonal performance factor rating. So I took out one energy guide label from my recent install. It's a typical yellow label that you see. It's going to have like a cooling for like air conditioning, like a SEER rating. But on the bottom, they're going to also have a heating rating. So that's the HSPF rating. And you really want a cold climate heat pump that's rated at least up to 10 or higher. The lower the number, the less efficient it's going to be, especially wintertime, right? When you really need that heat. So single zone versus multi-zone. I know that some of that illustration Andy was showing, there was one outdoor unit with a dual indoor unit, right? So the most common scenarios around here are typically 1-to-1. So it's going to have a one outdoor unit connect to to one indoor unit. And that's connected with a copper line set where the refrigerant is flowing, right? And then just requires a 240 power source. So essentially, through the miracles of refrigerant, you're essentially compressing that refrigerant, which lowers the boiling point. You're capturing a little bit of heat from outside, transferring that to the inside, and taking advantage of that heat. So really, the refrigerant is kind of the magic formula that makes the heat pump really excel. So typical installs. Typical installs for one-to-one unit is about a day or two. So during in-season, it might be a day with extended daylight. During off-season, so I just did one last week with shorter days, you're looking at about 2 days. But if you're looking at like a multi-head units with the one outdoor unit with, let's say, 2 to 3 heads, you know, you're looking at more like 3 to 4 days. So cost, the cost that I'm seeing around this region for, let's say, a single one-to-one unit is very similar to what I'm seeing in Southeast. Typically, like a single unit is you're going to see prices around 5,000 to 8,000 for full install parts and labor. Multi-head units, I'm seeing around like 8 to 12,000. So that's where really tapping into local, state, and federal incentives can, you know, take you far with these. HE still has that 500 credit for heat pumps installed. I know that ACE through AK Heat Smart, that's going to hopefully come online soon, that homeowners can tap into that. The HEA also has line of credit loan program. So they're saying you can install heat pumps through low interest loan, and the payments are kind of tacked onto your monthly bills. So, yeah.
We're going to break for questions before we deep dive into
Yep.
cost. So if that's where you're going,
yeah,
have Randy talk about Erin.
Yeah. Perfect.
Both slides, both songs, no nothing. Oh, sorry. All right. So basically, my name is Randy Arndt. I've been installing heat pumps in Homer for 16 years. I started out putting them in my houses. I built 6-star houses, energy efficient houses, and I found it was the smartest way to approach it. Having lived here for 60 years, I've gone through all the different heatings, the coals, up farther, sorry. I'm out of my element here. So anyway, I think what we're going to talk about here is basically the difference between the mini splits and the air to water and the ground source. And heat pumps are a misnomer because they're actually air conditioners that are just flipped. So if you're familiar with air conditioners, you're just taking the heat from the house and dumping it outside. But the other side, we take it from outside and we put it in the house. That's all it is. That's the difference. Most of them can flip back and forth. So I actually installed one up here for somebody who wanted air conditioning. And at the same time, we hooked up heater. We hooked up the air conditioner for his wine room. So he has the ability to cool the wine room and heat the house at the same time. The air to water is very similar in the mini splits, except you're actually bringing that refrigerant, that heat from outside, and you're heating water. That water now can be used in a multitude of ways. It can be used, well, actually, it allows you also to do your domestic hot water at the same time. So they tend to, and I'm so glad that Andy showed up here because I was having to do mini splits and I'd rather not. I tend to do more of a whole house approach where you basically bring in this, whether it's through the refrigerant or through the water, you bring in hot water. And then that hot water can either be used through an air handler, it can go through a radiant system, it can go through radiators, it can do a lot of different things. And that allows us a much bigger thing. At the same time, we can also heat the domestic hot water for the house at the same time. So the air to waters are different in that they have basically the unit outside is usually much bigger. and it heats the water outside, and you use the glycol base because it's going outside and it would freeze otherwise. And you bring that in, and then you use that water however you choose to. It can replace boiler. It can go into new systems. It can go into existing systems. It can go into pretty much whatever you want it to do, because you now have that heated water. The difference between that and the ground source is usually done by drilling holes in the ground, and there's a variety of ways. He showed you you can drill a well, suck the water out, try to take the heat out of that and dump the water back in the ground. You can put your absorber in a lake, but I'm finding that none of these things work very well up here for us. They may work where it's warmer, but they don't seem to work very well here. So I have gone into a system that's called a direct exchange, and I actually take the refrigerant and put the refrigerant in the ground and bring it back out. And so you get with refrigerant, when you go through that flashing point, you get 9 times as much energy during that period of time. You can absorb that energy. And I don't know if I'm going too far into this for you, but the difference between them is I find that the direct exchange ones are much more efficient. Homer ground is pretty much around, once you get down to the 5 or 6 feet, is pretty much 40 degrees all the time. And that's what we work off of. So the difference between the air source, which work really well in the summer, they don't work as well in the winter because your efficiency drops down. That's called the COP. It's your coefficient of performance for the amount of energy that you put into it. So the ground source basically work similar but different. They're just pumping heat. They're just pulling the heat out of the ground, which is recharged every summer by the solar, plus there's the large mass that you draw from. We're gonna talk later about the credits and stuff, because there's a big tax credit difference between the two. My notes aren't great, but yeah. So these systems differ from the mini splits in that they're designed really for an entire house, whether it's new construction or old construction. So they tend to be more expensive, and I won't go into that yet, but they tend to be more expensive, and they do more. And so that's the big difference between. I was so glad when he showed up, I didn't have to do any more mini splits. And anyway, because I tend to like these more because I find them to be very smart. They're just smart energy. And I think that's all for now.
Okay, great. I'd actually love if all our presenters came up here. We can do a quick round of applause because I know we're excited. Thank you, each of you, for getting us rolling. I want to open the floor to questions. We have about 10 minutes for questions right now. Again, I'll just remind us, we're going to deep dive into the costs and the potential rebates after this portion. So maybe save those questions for later. Okay, Nathan.
Yeah, I've got new land. I haven't drilled my well yet. And is that a good opportunity to put in a ground source heat pump?
Yes, I would say yes, but
you should take the microphones out.
I tend to not use the water ones, because one of the things, we actually installed one in one of the systems and we pulled the water out, but the water is 40 degrees and water freezes. So the systems only pull out about 5 degrees out of it. So it's not the most efficient way to do this. I didn't get into, you can drill or you can do fields. You can do it either way. So if you have, in Homer, it's a little harder, and I see some people here who have the drilled ones. And then there's also, if you have a large field and a large space, it's actually a little easier just to dig some trenches and put them in there and then refill it. So,
already put in our driveway.
Well, no, okay.
Yeah. That's a good option.
Yeah. There's a nice thing about the systems when you do a field, you can weave it between trees, you can weave it around. They don't have to be square. They don't have to be anything. You can follow wherever you want. And that's one of the beauties of it, especially if you don't have much land. And then the other option is obviously just go straight down.
I'm going to ask actually our presenters to come join me up here so that the Zoomers can see you while you're answering the questions. And Zoomers, you can raise your hand or put your questions in the chat. We have a great volunteer, Lakshmi, monitoring. Okay. I'll go right in the...
Can you have them repeat the question?
And presenters, repeat the question, please. Right in the middle here.
Gentleman that was just talking last there, you were talking about a glycol in the ground for fields, up the field. Say you're going to do it in the field 7 feet down or whatever you're doing. And you also said that you found that you're running the Freon, or you're running it. I didn't understand what you meant by that. You're running it through all the tubes like I'd run my glycol through?
Yeah, it would be different. When the question was the difference between glycol and the refrigerant going through the ground. They're called, the ones with the refrigerant and the copper in the ground are called a direct exchange, and it takes advantage of the refrigerant and the copper because they're very conductive. If you get into a system that's using glycol in the ground, one of the questions you asked was how deep you go. Well, sometimes they go 400 feet to get enough, or you have the slinky system that goes all over. And I found that those systems don't work as well up here. There's been a lot of them installed, and some do, but a lot of times the absorption through the HDPE pipe is not very good, so you have to have a large amount of it. And I just found that the refrigerant, the direct exchange ones work well for me here. I've installed both, and I probably won't do any more of the other ones. I just found people aren't happy with them. And you can actually, when I first got involved with this, I thought it was funny at the time, but I can actually pump heat out of permafrost when I'm using refrigerant. You cannot do that with a water-based system because there's no moisture to grab. I mean, no heat to grab the energy.
So the space it's using must be a lot less then?
Yeah, so basically if we were going to put in say a drilled one, it would go from about here to there, and we just bring them out, drop the holes in, bring them into a manifold, and then run it into there. If we were going to do a field, it would be larger than this, although most of the time I just do trenches, and they're like 200 feet long, and you can snake them wherever you want, and that's why it gives you the ability to make that work. And then when you start talking about the glycol ones, then you're talking about much larger areas.
Thanks. A quick follow on that. The reason to go with the glycol would be if you. Thanks, Jen.
So the reason to go with the glycol then would be if you're trying to do something with radiators or like transferring the heat once it's in the building.
No, then the glycol, that just depends upon what unit, whether you have an air source, because the process happens. With a direct exchange, it all happens inside the house. Okay. So there's the glycol, you wouldn't even have to use glycol because all the water's inside. Yeah. So
if you wanted to use
right. So I usually put the units inside because I'm the one that has to work on them, and I don't want to be outside right now working on them. So we put them in a crawl space or a garage or something else.
We're gonna let the Zoom folks have a question.
Okay, this is a question about, can wellheads be used for ground transfer systems? I have a wellhead 10 feet below ground level. The water is 32 feet down, and I can only measure 50 feet of depth. Can I run the source and return down the same well pipe?
No. So normally if you're going to do that, you're going to pull out of one and you're going to drop it in another one to put it back in, or some people just dump it on the ground, whatever. But what ends up happening is, especially a smaller well like that, it doesn't have the gallons per minute that you're looking at, probably a 10 gallon a minute pump. And it's really expensive to run the pumps. And that's what I have found is that the costs of doing that just don't make it feasible here. It may be feasible somewhere else, but not here.
For the air source heat pump, if you put the exterior part like in a crawl space where it was protected and the range of temperatures was smaller, is that possible, or do you have to have open air?
Yeah, so that is actually a common question that I get. So most of the time, you really have to have enough volume in those kind of situations, right? Typically, that's not the case. So it's going to be hard to pull that off in your typical residential setting. The outdoor units are really designed to excel in outdoor setting, unless you really have a large volume space and you can really calculate amount of air that's, you're taking in to bring that into that, crawl space setting. So kind of have to have an intake and outtake and try to calculate that you're replenish enough air. So it's possible, but most likely not. Yeah.
Satchel, question here.
Yeah, I just want to address that. We have, if you lived in Homer very long, you have the bench and then you have the snow zone. And so what we have found is with these units, if you're going to, down here, you can get away with it being outside like they do everywhere else. But we're finding that you have to have them covered and under decks and other things, or building actually literally a roof over them to get them, because what ends up happening otherwise, there's too much snow blowing around or drifting up against it. So you really have to protect it. And a crawl space wouldn't work, but a deck or, you know, or something along the line that's built over it to protect it from that snow load is imperative for anything above Homer. Even in Homer, I like to try to cover them if I can, but not always.
Quick question. How difficult would it be to retrofit or add a second head to a heat pump? Andy, I know you installed mine, and right now it's just a single unit, single head, and I'm thinking of extending the heat to another, to like a water house, basically.
Yeah, so if you're working with a single zone one-to-one system, you would have to get another one-to-one unit. Versus if you're working with like a multi-head unit, let's say a 2 to 3 head unit, you know, that's something you kind of need to plan ahead of time, right? So, but I usually recommend going 2 single zones if you're looking at 2 head units, mainly because efficiency is going to be greater for the most part. And then you kind of have that insurance factor, right? If one has issues or needs maintenance, you can still operate the second unit, versus if you have multi-unit, if the outdoor unit shuts down, you're without heat.
There's a question about how these systems interface with solar panels or radiant floor heating.
So for air-to-air units, you know, you're using electricity really to operate the system, right? So you're just moving heat. So solar and air source heat pumps, it makes perfect sense. So a lot of my air source heat pumps that I'm installing, the homeowners also have solar, like a grid tie system as well. So yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Our problem here is that when we use the heat pumps the most, there is no sun. So I'd love to see HEA go to a year-round, what's they call it when you charge? Yeah, an annual net metering would be awful nice, because when we want the heat pump to run most of the time now, it's dark, and we don't have that. It would be nice to be able to charge it all summer. I mean, they give you a 6-cent credit and charge you 25 cents for it. It'd be nice to store some of that up, and because they're paying 6 cents anyway. Whether it's from the solar panel things up there or not. We're working on it, trying to figure out how to make that work better, because I think it's the perfect match, but we don't live in a perfect place. So. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So in a radiant system, basically the water temperatures, depending upon how, you know, tight your house is, which is the important part of building a house, is the floor temperatures, water range usually about 90 degrees or less, usually more in the 70s, 80s degrees, which is a perfect match for a heat pump, because the heat pump, the higher you turn the temperature, the higher the pump runs, which is the more expensive it is. So if you can, it's actually the perfect match for it, because it basically runs the water you're creating at a lower temperature, and it actually is even more efficient than just using it for other things.
One more question in the chat. Is there other questions in the room?
Randy, would you completely, would you completely replace my existing boiler?
No, actually, what I recommend people do is leave the boiler there, because if you take it out, you're not going to get anything for it. And second of all, it's a backup, which is something I didn't bring up on the air source ones. With these better systems that are used, the air to water, they actually have a backup electric system, and should the heat pump go down, they can still produce heat and hot water with an electric resistance, which is just a secondary backup. But no, I suggest, or I recommend that people just don't take the boiler out. And if it ever got super cold, I've seen it 25 below here, you know, you're now past where your air conditioner, or excuse me, your heat pump is efficient. You just turn on that and heat with that.
And hot water.
Yeah, I would provide both of them. When you get to that point, the fuel is cheaper. And plus it's a backup, you know, kind of thing.
The last question online is about somebody in Seldovia looking at an air-to-water heat pump in an efficient, larger house. They do get occasional power outages during storms. Can we reasonably power a heat pump with a backup generator during outages?
Yeah, but you're going to have to design your system that way so that you're going to switch it over to the, basically it runs at 220. Most all the heat pumps run at 220. So if you can produce 220, and a regular generator won't produce that. So you have to have a generator that's set for that.
Okay, great. Any dying last questions? Keon. What size breaker is that generally?
Well, I'll speak to mine. Mine run anywhere from a 40 to a 50. The mini splits are much smaller than that.
Great.
Yeah, for mini splits, you're looking at about 15 to 30. That's most common.
220 at what wattage?
So the outdoor unit usually takes, the compressor usually takes a 40, and then you actually have two breakers on the system. You'd have a 40 for the outside when it's running, and then the inside one runs on about less than 10, but if you turn on your electric immersion heater, you can pull up to 50 on it. So you've got to kind of design it for that.
Okay, and I want to just let everyone know that folks who signed up over Zoom, I have your emails. Folks who came today, make sure that you added your email to your sign-in. I am going to send around not just the recording, but contact information for all of these folks and other helpful resources, the heat pump calculator, via email, hopefully by the end of the week. So I'm going to actually, the next two things we're going to talk about is what is the typical cost of these systems, and there are many variables that will determine that. So I'm actually going to have our two installers address that first, and then I'm going to have Andy and Erin come back to talk about the rebates. So right now. Sorry. Yeah.
So obviously there's a wide variety of needs, interests, and everything else. And so you have the air source ones, and I've basically I've gone to two models, which if you're interested in, I'll give you the website for them. You can do research on them. The air source ones are running anywhere, depending on if you have existing system and you're hooking up to it, it can run $20,000 to $25,000 for these systems. That's your whole house, domestic hot water, everything. If you're wanting to also install, because the way I design my house is most tight houses, energy efficient houses have to have an HRV. And so what I've done is you already have to duct your house for that and line your house up for that, unless you're going to put the holes in the wall, which I don't necessarily recommend. But so what I've done is I found a HRV that has a hydronic coil, and it's called a clean air furnace. And so then what we do is we can use domestic hot water, and then it can heat the entire house while also doing the HRV functions. And so you end up with that, and you can add another 10,000 for that. And when you're doing ground source, I have to drill holes in the ground, and I've got my own drill basically, because that's about half of what I'd have to hire a well driller to punch the holes in the ground. So, but they can run the same thing, maybe 20 in the 20s to low 30s. But that's basically the entire house, including your your ducting and everything else. So and if you have ducting, like it's mentioned, if you already have ducting, you can connect to that. There's a lot of ways to do, but there's such a wide variety of needs. Whether, like your house, I wouldn't even know what you have without looking at it and kind of doing that. So I think the most expensive system I've ever installed was $34,000 or something. And that includes everything in the entire house: hot water, domestic ducting, the systems, and everything.
For air source heat pumps, so I work with strictly kind of industry leading brands, Mitsubishi and Fujitsu. They're both Japanese brands. So I'm a warranted installer. So usually that comes with a 10-year parts and compressor warranty. You can find cold weather climate mini splits on the market, like a tier 2 or kind of more generic brands that's going to be a lot cheaper, noticeably cheaper. I mean, sometimes 1/3 of the cost, right? But a lot of times when you purchase mini splits online, there's usually no warranties that come with that. So a lot of times, if you have issues or trying to get replacement parts, you're going to run into obstacles, or any installer willing to work on heat pumps that you purchased online. So how I do it is I work with warranty distributors. So let's say Fujitsu, I reach out to Fujitsu's distributor based out of Anchorage, and then I'm under their installer platform. So I can pass the warranty down from the parent company all the way down to the installer. So typically like a 1-to-1, you're looking at, usually they're a secondary heat source, right? So what I mean by that is homes usually have a wood stove and a Toyo, and they're looking to replace the Toyo with a mini split. So typically during the day in the wintertime, they have the wood stove going, let that go out in winter, nighttime. They're wanting the heat pump to keep the home at 62, 64 degrees, until they get the wood stove going again. And then during shoulder seasons in summer, trying to have heat pump do majority of the heating. So really using that wood stove as a primary during peak heating season. So usually 1-to-1 units is probably the most common. And, average size you're looking at is typically like a 18,000 BTU all the way up to 30,000 BTU. And you're looking at closer to like 5,500 to like 7,000 all parts and install for that. That's without any rebates or credits.
So let's talk about the rebates. And let's start with Erin, because the HEA rebate is pretty straightforward. And then we'll hand it back to Andy.
Yeah, and I think that already pretty much covered it earlier. It's just HEA will give you on your bill $500 credit and $500 to the installer, which you don't get both if you install it yourself. It has to be a licensed person. And so that's been started in 2022 as a pilot program, and I think it's been 27 of those rebates have been given out so far. And because it's set up as a limited program, there's only so much in the budget, but it's been added to the next year's budget in preliminary form anyway. So you should be fine on that for now. And that's its own thing. So it would be additional to any other rebates or other tax credits or other programs that Andy's going to talk about. Yeah.
And the installers will be able to answer this. The 500 that goes to the installer are you going to credit, do the installers credit that? Like, do you give $500 off the installation?
It's for them.
I've only got one once, maybe two, and that's all.
Okay.
I go visit my grandkids. But the owner gets $500 off of their electric bill. So it's a mutual thing.
Didn't mean to put you on the spot. Just
no, not working.
Can we go back one slide? No, I guess not. Maybe go forward one slide. Yeah. Okay. So in addition to the $500 HEA rebate, our latest program at Alaska Heat Smart is courtesy of the Environmental Protection Agency, their Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, which they just, in September, basically gave 25 awards nationally for 300 applicants, and Alaska Heat Smart was the only one in state that got one. And it's a big one. We got $39 million for incentivizing heat pumps between Kodiak and Ketchikan. So we're looking at 50 communities, 5 years, 6,100 heat pumps, combination of a a home energy assessment, which helps you understand what you need. And then based upon income, pretty generous incentives. So we can jump ahead to the next slide. Pretty generous incentives for, as currently written and hopefully to be finalized, incentives for everybody. The lowest income level, 80% area median income and down, can get up to $8,500. Next level below that, $6,000. And then, amazingly enough, as currently written, anybody can get a $4,000 credit. No income requirements. I mean, it sounds pretty ludicrous, but they've done this in the state of Maine, and it's been incredibly successful. And for Homer specifically, the numbers are here. It's a pretty ambitious program concerning what's been done here to date. It may sound a little crazy. It's based on Juneau numbers because in Juneau, roughly 5 years ago, we had maybe 100 installations in that year, and now we're up to 500 a year. And so it's really accelerated quickly as understanding has grown, education has taken place, and programs not quite this generous, but fairly generous have been launched, which make it so much easier for people to pay for these things. And so roughly 570 heat pump incentives for Homer alone, roughly 700 for this area. For Graham and Wallach, Soldovia, Soldotna, and then down here to Homer, and Seward. And so you can see the numbers on here if you can read that. Basically 340 incentives at $4,000, roughly 170 at $6,000, and roughly 60 at $8,500. And so if your system costs $8,000 and you can get a $4,000 incentive, all of a sudden you just saved $4,000. If the IRA Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, which are currently in existence, are still in existence, when this comes around, you can still take an additional 30% off your next 1040 filing, up to $2,000. So if you have a $4,000 bill for your system, you can take another $1,200 off of that with your tax credit.
It's the ground, the geothermal, which would be the ground ones, that one's 30% of the cost of the complete install. The other one, I believe, is only $2,000.
Yeah, I'm gonna hand the mic to Randy here, but for an air source heat pump, the mini splits that we're talking about, you can take up to $2,000, 30% of the cost up to $2,000. For ground source, it's incredibly more generous.
Yeah, so when you get into the ground source systems, they actually are a 30% tax credit of the amount that you spend on the entire thing, which in a new home could be the heating system, the whole heating system. So it gets to be quite large from that point of view. But the air source and even the air to water ones, they only qualify for the $2,000 one. They don't, whatever. So I'm not trying to push you. I'm just saying that's the difference between the two, and suddenly it does make a big difference.
Yeah, because 30% could be $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. Right on top of this, yeah. This isn't type specific. This could be a mini split. This could be air to water. This could be, got to get in the Zoom screen here. This could be ground source. So they're all on the table. We hope to have this program up and running maybe by early summer at the latest. We'll see how that goes. Fingers are crossed. We do have a wait list available for anyone who wants more information as we get it. We're trying to determine things like, if you're a wood burning home, do you qualify? We think so. If you're doing a project now with ACES not currently running, can you get a retroactive incentive? We think so. So stuff like that. As we learn that, we're going to post it on the website, akheatsmart.org, and the program's called ACES under financial assistance. And if you're on the wait list and we have this information, it'll be emailed to you directly, and you don't have to think, oh, I should go to the website and see if there's anything new happening with this program.
Will you talk about Alaska Housing Finance Corporation rebates through the IRA and how these interplay?
Sure, great question. Satchel was asking me to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act Home Energy Appliance Rebate Program that Alaska Housing Finance Corporation is spearheading. So Alaska Housing Finance Corporation is in charge of the Department of Energy's program through the Inflation Reduction Act, which essentially is bringing $78 million through AHFC to Alaskans in 2 different programs. One for rebates. And by the way, this isn't rebates, these are incentives, meaning you don't have to have the money up front. You're not going to get the money back. You're going to get the money before you spend it. You'll put down your down payment, you get the work done, we verify it, you get the rest of the money. So you don't have to have it up front. Rebate, you get it after the fact. But AHFC is in charge of putting together a home energy appliance rebate program, HEAR is their acronym, $37.5 million for heat pumps, for energy efficiency, some for weatherization. And it kind of dovetails with our program in that essentially it's more or less doing the same thing. And so we're working with AHFC so that there's only one place you have to look for info and to figure out where you need to go. For instance, Alaska Heat Smart has all these programs. We used to get all these people applying to all the programs because they didn't know what to apply for. And so we'd get 6 applications from the same person, and it was driving them crazy and driving us crazy. And so now we have one application, comes in the door, and we point you where you need to go. Same with this system. We hope there's one application, either directs you to AHFC if you're a more interior Alaska, colder place, spot where maybe a heat pump's not going to work, and you can put the money towards a higher efficient natural gas boiler or furnace or weatherization or some other system. If you go through that door and you're coastal Alaska, you're an oil burner or maybe gas burner, propane, and you want the heat pump, well, then you come to the ACES program. And so according to the EPA, our financing is secure with the administrative change that's happening in January. We hope they're right. Department of Energy's money is on the table. They haven't yet applied for their program to the Department of Energy. They're putting it together. They have to send it to DOE. DOE has to approve it. So they're a little more kind of behind in terms of finalization or execution of the grant of the money. So our fingers are crossed that they're going to get that across the finish line and lock down that money before somebody takes it away.
Well, on that happy note.
Sorry, realist.
That's all right. So I'm excited because we have 45 minutes left. And the last thing on our agenda is actually before we break into a lot more time for questions, there are a few people in the room that have heat pumps installed. And so I just wanted to give 10 minutes to some testimonials. So Erin's going to talk about her mini split. Scott is going to talk about his air to water. And Shauna is in the room, who's been working with the Homer Drawdown heat pump committee and been surveying heat pump owners across the peninsula for the last 6 months. We don't have a ton of surveys back, but she can share some of the overall findings. So I'm going to give it to Erin because she's closest.
Sure. So so I have a heat pump in my house. My house is small. It's basically a 2-story yurt. And so I just have one of the single zone mini splits. And that's been my entire heat source since December 2022. So about almost a couple years now. And so because I like to track these things, I just wanted to first say, I set my house at a normal temperature and it stays warm. It's fine. And another thing, in my small house, I end up spending about in the winter, I use about 10 kilowatt hours a day to heat my house, which is about $3 a day. And then, if you it's about half as much if you average it over the whole year, because I don't heat my house much in the summer. And I think that's about it there. And and I switched from firewood, and we did for a while weigh the firewood as we brought it into the house because I wanted to kind of have an equivalent, and because I really am that much of a geeky person. And a cord of firewood is equivalent to about 1,100 kilowatt hours for my heat pump.
Per year, how many cords is that?
Well, I mean, that depends on how much you use per year. We used a few, right? And so, yeah, 2, 3, something like that. But it depends on I did it actually by heating degree day. So I had the weighed the wood and like used the heating degree days for the wood. And then I used the heating degree days when I had the heat pump, which is a completely different year. I have so many spreadsheets. You can hand it to Scott.
Hi, I'm Scott Waterman. A couple of years ago, we put a air to water, air source to water heat pump in because we already had a hydronic system in place. And we had solar thermal, which works great from mid-February to about mid-October, but doesn't work at all this time of year. And we had a wood-fired boiler. And so whenever we wanted to leave in the wintertime, we had to hire someone to come in about every 2 or 3 days and build a fire in the boiler to keep our house from freezing up if we were gone. So a heat pump going in really made a big difference. And I have not done any of the kind of tracking that Erin has. But it has worked out quite well. My wife really likes it because she doesn't have to deal with the wood boiler if I'm not around. And we both have aging parents, so we've been spending more and more time away the last couple of years. And it does make a big difference that we can, either one or both of us can be gone without having any real issues. And tying it into the hydronic system was very simple. We had actually left a couple of stubs on our system that we could just, with valves on them. So when it came time to hook it up, it was actually already ready for it. And there wasn't any extra work that had to be done. And the hydronic system has in-floor heat throughout the buildings. And we make it, we usually run the temperature of the heat pump output to be right around 100 degrees. And for the most part, it keeps the house reasonably warm. It's a little chilly in the mornings on a day like today, but we have a wood cook stove and fire that up for breakfast and we're fine. So it works well.
Sean, are you prepared? Sorry, I don't know if I put you on the spot here.
A little bit. So I'm going to talk. First, I want to mention again about the questionnaire. And I know a lot of people came in after this was mentioned before. So if there's anybody in the room who has a heat pump and has not yet done the questionnaire and is willing to do that, I did bring some copies, and just kind of see me and I'll hand you one. And so we ended up putting in a heat pump as part of a massive renovation of our house the house was originally built in 1982, and about 4 years ago, we did this major renovation. And that included getting it re-insulated, replacing all the stuff in the walls, putting in ductwork. And in the process, we removed the old heating system, which had been a fuel oil stove. And I had been told that the stove was on its last legs and would need to be completely replaced. And I'd been told that our fuel tank was going to fall over and die, and so on and so forth. So all the old heating system was stuff that we were going to have to completely replace anyway. And so when I was researching getting a heat pump, it was initially really pretty hard to get the information. It seemed really promising, but some of the info I was getting was contradictory, which was kind of disturbing. And I think that things have come a long way based on talking to people in the questionnaires. And so far with the questionnaires, I only have about a dozen of them locally that have been completed all the way, where people have all the information. And a couple of salient things that I've noticed. One is that it seems like people are using lots of really diverse brands and models. So out of 12 replies, I think we have like 8 different brands. So people have not really settled on exactly which kind of thing they're using. And the other thing is that of the things that have been turned back, everybody says that they are quite satisfied with their system and are glad that they got it. And the only person who has some qualms about that is actually myself. And we've had some problems with it, but I'm still glad I got it. But it's been a real learning experience. It has, we have a air to water system. And what it does is it heats up a tank that is a water glycol mixture that does radiant floor heating. And the bad news is that it has turned itself off multiple times. And you can't tell if it's running or not because it doesn't make any noise. And the good news about that is that when we've realized that there's a problem, we've brought back our installer, who is not here this evening, and they've always managed to get it working again. But it's very mysterious because every time it's failed, it's been something different. So it's been quite the adventure, but the good thing about it is it seems to be working right now. That's not wood, is it? Oh, well. And it is very quiet. There's no fumes, and our house is very cozy. It seems to be, whatever's running our house heat, it seems to be keeping the place pretty, nice. So appreciate that. And
okay. Yeah, so we have a lot of time for questions, but I wanted to ask the audience a question first. Raise your hand if you're on heating oil, diesel. Awesome. Raise your hand if you're just on wood. Raise your hand if you are on propane. Louis, holding it down. And then raise your hand if you're on natural gas. Okay, interesting. I don't have much to say. I just wanted to see if folks who are on natural gas are seriously considering heat pumps. So I'm going to open it back up for questions, but I think before I do that, I'm just going to share a couple of more announcements just in case folks start to trickle out. I do want to let everybody know that Homer Drawdown is actively organizing an energy fair that would take place in this space. So that's going to look like a tabling event with a lot of different vendors, including heat pump installers. Our hope is that HEA will be there. Our hope is that who's going to be there, Jan? We hope to have a lot of people who offer weatherization there as well. So insulators, SBS and Olmers are going to be there to offer, their weatherization products. The goal of the energy fair is really to connect y'all with resources to make your home more energy efficient. Though we're inviting the city of Homer and HEA and NSTAR. We'll see if they can come. And so that's going to be January 25th. And it's just another opportunity to have more one-on-one conversations with these people who can provide you with the resources to save money on your heating bills. So more on that later. And I just wanted to invite you all to get involved with Drawdown. Right now, we are pretty hyper-focused on planning that energy fair, but we certainly can use more help. Our meetings are typically the second Tuesday of the month. And we've been meeting in the lobby because it's cozy, but also in this space. And I believe I looked at the calendar recently, and that means our next meeting is on December 10th. And yeah. Yes, Jan.
We would be remiss if we did not thank Tina Seaton for the delicious soups. All of you, thank you. Those were wonderful. And if you want to leave a tangible reminder of your gratitude, there is a donation box back there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jan. And yes, thank you so much, Tina. Sorry for the latecomers that didn't get any soup. We did not expect such a wonderful turnout. Okay, so opening it back up to questions. I'll just look to you. Okay. And I would like to have our panel come back up to join us to answer questions. Feel free to bring your chair.
So I'm just wondering what maintenance looks like. A yearly, is it what maintenance is required?
For mini splits, it's for indoor units every other month, just vacuuming out the filter element that's inside. Mainly just vacuuming and hosing down any dander or anything that collects in that screen filter. So a lot of the units will have a HEPA filter as well that's built in. So it's just simple as vacuuming it and just hosing it down quick and putting it back in every other month. For outdoor unit, just pay attention to the debris and dirt that's accumulating in the coil. So usually back of the unit, if you see some stuff that's building up, it's just simple as taking a low pressure garden hose and just spraying the debris off. So that's pretty much simple maintenance for homeowners.
So one of the things, because our systems are similar but different, is that with the whole house system, you're basically getting a filter. Well, when I end up doing it, we get these April Air makes these whole house filters, and you're able to filter the air anywhere from 11 to 13 to 16. They have carbon filters. They have all these different things. And basically, if you have animals in the house, you're going to change them probably twice as much as you would otherwise, but it's once a year. The units themselves run for until something breaks, usually what it is. I'm actually looking at this, gets to be a lot more, because I basically end up doing most of all the units I install. I just do free maintenance for years, and I think I have to change that because some of them are 10, 12 years old. I'm still doing free maintenance. So I think I'm going to change that. But I would probably set up, if it turns out to be, I can't even imagine, you're talking about hundreds of units here. Maybe some type of, and I'll talk to Andy some more about this too, where you basically have a service contract where once a year you come out, you check the refrigerant, you clean things, you fill, just basically go down through it. Not everybody wants that. Most of you are Alaskans, so you're capable of taking care of all that stuff yourself. But then there would be the call out or whatever. And I think I'm getting to the age now where I really don't want to work for free anymore. So, but the maintenance is it's very similar, if you think about it, to like a refrigerator or something. It's just the compressors that run, and a lot of the how many of you have actually cleaned your refrigerator back of the refrigerator? Yeah, some of you have, yes. But the rest of you haven't, so go home and take a look and see what's back there. And that's what Andy was talking about, because you're using air all the time to move things through, and anything that's small, like a condenser or the fins and whatnot are very small, and they just collect whatever. And then, like, again, if you have animals, it's going to be much worse, because all that stuff just gets pulled around and drafted back through there.
Have you guys moved to the center of the space?
I just want to add to that, if I may, for anybody who has a air source heat pump or is thinking about getting one, that's one of the number one issues that we hear complaints about, which is, oh my gosh, my heat pump's not working. And I ask them if they've cleaned their filter, and they say no. And they open it up, and it looks like a dead animal in there, because there's so much dust and hair and maybe fur, and you can actually peel it off like your dryer, your lint screen in your dryer. You peel off like a half an inch of stuff. And if your air filter in your heat pump looks like that, yeah, you're not going to get a lot of heat out of it. And you take it out and clean it, all of a sudden your heat's back. And so they think it's broken. It's just dirty.
There's a question about if the ACES program includes the Central and North Peninsula.
Can we define those for a newbie here?
Peninsula is like Soldotna and Kenai. North Peninsula, Cooper Landing and Hope.
Seward, where's Seward's Hall?
Seward is north. Well, Seward's in.
Seward is in for sure. It's it's right on the water. I think Soldotna is probably about as far north as we're going to go, and that's really just an issue of functionality.
I'll share what ACES do.
Accelerating clean energy savings across Alaska's coastal communities. So we stripped out the last part. We're just saying ACES, accelerating clean energy savings.
I had a question right here.
More of a comment that although you do have to clean those HEPA filters, monthly, once every 2 months, there's good data that it improves health outcomes, including asthma, because you are constantly cleaning the air and taking this crowd out.
Does it make much of a difference if you put the mini splits on a south wall as opposed to a north wall?
I'll hand the mic to these two here in a second, but I think I know from my experience that we tend to like an outdoor compressor sited on the non-weather side of the home. So for instance, at my house, the southeast side just gets battered relentlessly, and I have to paint it every year. It's just it's a mess. And so to put a compressor there would be foolish. If I can tuck it around the corner, put it on the other side of the building, much better protected from the weather, protected from rain and wind. And again, I couldn't advocate more for a cover for a small roof over it to protect it from the weather. Granted, these things are made to be outside. It's a heating system outside your house. It's kind of unique that way. And so they're built for that, but we all know that anything left outside for too long is going to start to degrade and get kind of beat up.
Yeah, so south side, it's really about ambient temperature. It's going to be pretty similar, whether it's the east or your north side. So I usually like to focus on non-prevailing wind location because it's all about the outdoor unit needs to move that air, right? There's a big prop in the front. So it's pulling in air and pushing that air out. So you don't want anything really disturbing that airflow. So
yeah, I basically look for an area to protect it from the snow, and the prevailing winds are the two big things because the snow will get blown in if you've got it in the wrong direction. And another thing, because I always think about BTUs being an energy builder, you can create solar heaters that direct air towards them, so you pick up more BTUs if you're creative. And there's a lot of things that you can do, but the biggest thing is keeping the snow off them and the blowing snow. And you guys lived here one winter, you know where the snow drifts are, and you stay away from those. One guy, I think he put his 8 feet up on the back of his garage so there would be no snow drifts. So, but I don't want to work.
More questions.
The snow is another issue that we get calls about. And I had a kind of a funny one last year. A woman called all frantic, saying her heat pump's not working. What should she do? Who should she call? And I said, oh well, what's it not doing? Well, it's not giving me any heat. So I said, can you send me a picture of your outdoor unit of the compressor? She said, well, no, it's buried in the snow. I said, well, great, go dig it out, and all of a sudden, problem solved. So sometimes it's the simple things.
There was a question about rebates applying if people have already installed heat pumps, not just in the process of installing. And I guess, where does one define in the process and already installed?
Well, I can speak to the ACES program. We're hoping that there's a retroactive clause to it, which would mean that if you have installed a heat pump from the date that the EPA signed the grant, which is something like September 19th on to now, if you've got proper documentation of the work that was done, the cost of the unit, and the make and model, and the contractor who did the work, it's possible that you could be eligible for an incentive. It's our intent to not have anybody put off a project or stop work on a project because of this grant not being ready to roll. So we're hoping that retroactivity will work for these incentives, but you may want to get on the wait list so we can keep you posted because we don't know yet.
Well, the HEA ones, they won't give you any money till after you've done it anyway, but I could ask David there if there's any backdating problems.
If you were to have installed it after the program kicked in late 22, then yeah, go online, fill out the application, send it, I'll approve it. But if you predate the existence of the program, no.
So is there an overall efficiency better for the coming from the air, the outdoor compressor, or tapping into the ground, tapping into the earth? Is one system have an advantage over the other for being efficiently?
Yes. In the summer, the air sources are much better or higher efficiency. Your COP is what you want to watch for. In the winter, the ground is 40 degrees, and your efficiency then of the ground source becomes greater than the air source. So it's kind of a flux. It depends a lot on where you're trying to do it. I mean, but in the end, they average out 3 to 4%. The COP, you can go home and look that up, is coefficient of performance for $1 worth of HEA that you give it. It gives you so many BTUs. And so that's what that COP is. It's kind of the measurement of how efficient it is. So the answer to your question is yes and no. It kind of depends upon what you want. And like I said, there's just every situation is different. It's not like we're in Texas and there's 120 degrees outside and you're throwing an air conditioner on. It's more evolved up here. There's much more to it. So
yeah, for air source heat pumps, the COP is more of an instantaneous, like a real-time efficiency number that you're looking at. So you really want to focus on the heating seasonal performance factor rating, which is more cumulative, looking at the full picture. So during summer season, when the temperatures are more mild, the efficiencies are going to be a lot greater, right? And the colder it gets, you're going to see that number drop. So that's where the SPS rating, you can kind of get a general idea overall, like how efficient is this unit. So it's going to vary quite a bit from brand to brand, standard heat pump versus cold weather heat pump, single zone versus multi-head. So really pay attention to that heating seasonal performance factor rating.
I'm glad Andy brought that up because that HSPF number is really important when it comes to money. Like some of you may be familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act tax credit on your 1040, where you can get 30% off up to $2,000 or even more for the ground source system. There's requirements for that, for the model of heat pump that you're getting a tax credit for. If it's what Andy was referring to earlier as a standard unit, which basically doesn't work well in the cold, you can't get a tax credit for those. Or you could try to and then maybe get caught in an audit or something, but they're not on the list, and they're not going to be on our lists either. They're not on our list for our current programs, and they won't be for the ACES program. It has to be a cold climate model, no matter where you live in the region. Even if you're down in southern Prince of Wales Island, we're going to require that. They don't cost a whole lot more. They don't weigh a whole lot more, but they work a whole lot better and they make a whole lot more sense. So it's kind of a no-brainer guarantee that when it gets cold, you're going to have some heat.
Yeah, if you had a existing house that had a hydronic heating system in it, in-floor heating, and all you wanted to do was to install an air source heat pump, plumb that directly in, pretty much what Scott did. How's that cost compare to installing a mini split?
It's going to be a mini split, basically is air to air. So it's not going to do anything other than replace your monitor or whatever it is. When you get to the ground, then it's quite a bit more elaborate, but it's actually a very simple thing to do, depending on your controls and how you plumb it. But the cost difference between what you're saying, about $7,000 to $8,000 for a mini split, 5 to 7 for a mini split, you're talking more like 20 when you start getting into an air to water. I mean, there's cheaper models out there, but I've over the years, I've installed 8 different brands, several who have gone away, some who actually were in one of the pictures, but they've pulled their air to waters. So there's all kinds of things, and the ones that I stay with, they're just a better product now, and they've come a long ways, and so they're a little more expensive, but they're long term, and that's how I look at most of this: is what's the long term on these things? They're not, the units aren't the units I started out installing 16 years ago. They're much better, and of course much more expensive.
I think to clarify his question, he already has in-floor heating.
Correct.
Is that going to reduce the cost of the entire system if that infrastructure?
That would be the difference between just installing the air to water heat pump and a whole house system. See, so you're probably talking, say, 20-ish versus 30-ish for the whole house. Does that make sense?
So just the heat pump itself.
Yeah.
And basically.
Yeah, and then basically that's just the units are Yeah, units are more than his whole install. They're just bigger, they're more expensive, more difficult. There's actually one up on Mountain View where Lakshmi's staying that actually has one. That one doesn't have a roof on it, but we're in Homer, so I'm not near as worried about it. But if you get into the snow zone, then hers we're putting underneath the deck just to keep it out of there. But by the time you do the equipment, and I don't make a lot on them. I just kind of love them. So they are expensive, but they are long-term. And so that's the beauty of it for me.
Now, we all struggle with competing with natural gas, obviously. I do wonder whether there is a kind of a loophole for domestic hot water. Are there any kind of small, simple, cheap units that would just replace a domestic hot water boiler?
Yes, there's a unit. I'm just actually working on one for someone out here where it basically is a domestic hot water heater because the output is so small. It's only a 15,000 BTU unit. And plus heat pumps don't produce heat as fast as 110,000 boiler. It just doesn't. It's not. So yes, you can buy those. I'm waiting on a price back on them, but it's designed to heat domestic hot water only. It's not designed for the house, and you can use it for that, but it doesn't have the BTU output that you're going to need for an entire house. That's a Sanco 2, SANCO 2, made by Eco 2 or something like that. Yeah, and I don't think there's any in the state right now. I'm trying to find one, but we'll just have to bring it from the outside. But yeah, those are designed. It's similar in sense to the people that put solar panels in just to heat their hot water. It's the same kind of system. It's designed for that. It's not designed for a whole house.
Yeah, right now for just domesticated hot water, Sanco 2 is kind of the brand that people are putting in. Essentially, it's just the outdoor heat pump unit. And then you have a secondary, like a buffer tank. And then that just connects to your domesticated hot water layout in your home. So it's a smaller, really efficient unit. So
does that qualify?
Yeah.
And I just happen to know that there is one of those in Soldovia, and they are heating the house and the hot water with it. A little house.
Same with Southeast too. There's quite a few in Sitka and in Juneau. And amazingly enough, they can be used in a larger facility, larger building. I know of a 6,000 square foot building in Sitka right now that's looking at a Sanco 2 system. They're actually going to have 3 outdoor compressors all kind of in series working together to provide enough heat to tap into the ducting system of this building. But that does add up cost-wise pretty quickly.
So going back to what was said earlier, what's really important in any situation is knowing what your heat load is, because your heat load is how many BTUs you need to heat your house. And so some houses require 40,000 BTUs, and you can't get that. You'd have to have 3 of those basically. And if you have a small house and it's well insulated and isn't leaking, you can get away with these smaller units, but you just have to be careful, because some people try to put them in there, and without that little bit of buffer, if you want to heat on the cold days with fire or something else, that's fine. And these other ones will carry, the spring and volume. I turn my heat off in my house in probably May and don't turn it on until September. So I don't even have heat in my house during the summer. So you don't have that problem. But when it gets to days like today, those little units probably aren't going to produce unless you have multiple of them. The mini splits will do it, but those other ones, I looked at these a long time ago and just found that they're great for what they're designed for, but we always want to use the thing for what it's not designed for, just how we are. And we get ourselves in trouble when we do that.
That's just for domestic hot water. It's not for heating in your situation.
I have a question on incentives. The ACEs from the AGA, I know location.
Can you repeat that question? Was it for businesses? I'm pretty sure the HEA one doesn't care. Yeah, it's fine if you're a business.
Great question. Not sure. One more thing we're not sure about, and that we hopefully will have an answer to shortly. But we don't want to limit it to in any way if we don't have to, because it's a pretty steep target we're trying to reach. And so if a business wants to put in a heat pump, and the only requirement really is that that we're set on, that the EPA is set on, is that it's replacing fossil fuel use, because it's a carbon reduction grant. So if you're swapping it out for an electric resistance, then it's really not going to work all that well. So what's that?
You'd save more emissions if you swapped it out for electric resistance than if you swapped it out for natural gas.
Sure.
Okay, we have some more questions.
I just wanted to say something. Scott, you still here? Can I bring up what we've been discussing? In the RSAC, which is a subcommittee that goes to the Kenai Peninsula Borough or Assembly, we've been discussing, because of the cost of the bay and some of the schools over there, the high cost of fuel and propane. We've actually been looking at trying to figure out if we can put some test programs in there and put some heat pumps in there, not to carry the whole school, but just to run them and see if we can reduce those costs. And we think we can reduce the cost of the heat in there by 50 to 60% easily. And but it's a government bureaucracy, and we've been talking about it for a long time, and we're still talking about it. Anyway.
One of the questions online is somebody who lives in Seldovia, where there's groundwater that's limited or low perk rates, even with a deep well. The question is, how wet does the ground need to be to make ground source heat pump feasible?
If you're going to do that, and I would not suggest you do, if you were going to do that, you'd probably need a well that would produce at least 12 gallons per minute, and for like a long time, because you're either going to dump it back in another hole and hopefully it'll percolate its way over, or and I think Seldovia basically has bedrock pretty close to the surface, which is going to pretty much not make that work.
You mentioned government bureaucracy, so I got to ask, the Renewable Energy America project from the USDA Rural Development, I believe they've got up to 50% tax, or not tax credits, but grants for renewable energy. Do you know if this qualifies for any of the REAP grants?
Okay, Microsoft. When you say renewable energy, are you talking about power generation, or are you talking about the use of renewable energy for an application like this, home heating?
And energy efficiency kind of things. So I'm wondering if it pumps all that heat.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Being a southeaster, like solar panels, like don't what are I've heard of that stuff. No, we actually have a few around. No, I honestly don't know. I'd have to look into that and get back to you. I'm more than happy to do that.
The question is, what length can split units be? Can they be 20 feet or more apart?
So indoor, outdoor distance, I'm guessing. So yeah, so it can be up to 60, usually around 60, 65 feet before you have to start factor in how much more refrigerant to add to compensate. So if you decide to go 100 feet, let's say, you need to kind of factor in additional per foot and then calculate the amount of extra refrigerant to add to the system. So yeah, you can pretty much go up to 150, I'd say, for a single, like a one-to-one unit. And then I think multi-head, when you factor in, let's say 3 to 4 indoor unit to a single outdoor, that can get even greater, so it's overall linear distance. So
somebody asked a question earlier about they had a single head unit, And these units, these mini splits, they come with multiple heads. I mean, and each head that you get has a separate line set to it. So if you're thinking about doing this and you want later on maybe to add some more, then it might be beneficial, because you can cap them off. You don't have to use it, to put in a 2, put in 2, and Andy puts it in. You put in a 2 if you want to do it in another year or so. You can add that head on. You can't do that with the single ones. You can't split the lines, because the pumps are controlled different by different thermostats, and basically that's something. So when you get to that point, if you decide maybe you want 3, but you only want 1 right now, you may look at a 3-port system, and just, you don't have to use it if you don't want, but if you do, it's there and you're not buying another unit.
So I tend to recommend going at the 1-to-1, having 2 sets of those instead of, let's say, if you're looking at 2 indoor unit. I'm still a big fan of, I think the efficiency is better, and then you still have an insurance having 2 single zone units versus having like a dual zone multi-head unit. But once you start getting into 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm not a big fan of that, because it really gets down to aesthetics and trying to figure out how to get that line set to individual zones or locations, right? And ultimately, all that has to work its way back to that outdoor unit. So there's going to be a lot of demo, remodel, and then ultimately, where it's coming out of the house, you're going to have a lot of visible line set, almost like a spider web like network that's ultimately working its way back. So, yeah.
So it's cool. He's going to put it in. I'm not. But it brought up an interesting question, because I know some people that want to put a second one in also. And does that grant cover both of them or just one of them? Would it be considered multiple units fit this bill, or does it have 1 unit? That'd be an interesting question.
I think the grant is structured where it's per applicant. It's not so much per the system, like that. Well, you would either be eligible for the 4,000, the 6,000, the 8,500 if you put in a ground source, 4 heads, 1 head, mini split, 2 units, 3 units. Right, your incentive is going to stay the same. What system you get is entirely up to you and your contractor, and maybe the information that we provide through our assessment.
Yeah, coming back to putting in a well, I think you're referring to whether we would use the water sourced. What about wrapping a coil around the pipe as using Freon or?
Well, what's going to happen with that is you're going to freeze your well, because the copper goes so cold that it basically freezes. They don't want them around septic systems and around pipings and whatnot, because you can conceivably, on an extreme long time, you can pull that ground down. It will recharge itself. But just over the years, I've just gotten away from the water, because our ground is 40 degrees and it just doesn't have the energy. In Texas, I think their groundwater is 70. So, I mean, it would work really well, except if you're just charging heat, which is air conditioners do, it's a little harder to do that. So we can talk about this, but I'm going to encourage you to go a different direction for your own sake. Yeah.
And a little follow up on the units. This is speaking about a Washington home, but I've got 2 heads on a single unit, and I regret that all day long.
Okay.
Get individual redundant units.
Okay. Why is that?
The efficiency is horrible.
Yeah.
The climate control is also strangely really difficult to regulate. I'll set the thermostat at 66, and it's either cranking it like 72 or 76, or way down at like 62 in the one that's closer to the unit.
Right, and that really, yeah. What brand was that?
I can't remember.
Yeah, certain brands for multi-head indoor units can kind of fight with each other, right? So one could be blowing heat, another one could be blowing AC. Other brands can work well together. So it varies.
Yeah, get multiple units, stick them on the side of your house. Just I think it works much better.
Okay. One more. We have one more. Okay, so it sounds like we've got maybe 3 more questions, but maybe try to keep it tight.
I guess this question for Erin: what percentage of HEA is carbon based, and what's the future look like?
So right now, HEA is about 90% natural gas, 10% Bradley hydro. That varies somewhat year to year, depending on the water year, right? Like how much water goes into the lake. Potential near future, there is a contract with a solar provider that would add an additional 13% of renewable energy. So that would be taking from 10 to 23. And yeah, so that's what that is right now. And then you can, if you want the like actual emissions numbers, they're based on the power plant efficiencies, and they're a little different for all the gas plants on the rail belt. And I do have all those, but I won't go into them now.
This was back to the rebate timing. Did we hear that ACES rebates may only be available if installations were done after September 19th this year?
That's correct. And we're still not sure if they were done after September 19th and before our program is actually up and running and EPA approved, that we're not sure if those will be allowable as well. We're getting the message that they will be, that there will be retroactivity back to September 19th or so, but we're not positive about that yet.
Yeah, I had just a quick question on the underground copper with the refrigerant in it. How's the durability on those? Have you had any callbacks on those?
No, the original ones I put in didn't have. We have a cathodic. We drill an extra hole in that, or we put the sets out on the ends of the fields. That's probably new. Actually, my first unit I ever put in was my mother-in-law's, and it's still working. That was 16 years ago. That was really the test. And those ones are still performing. 16 years later, a lot of boilers go out before then. So it seems to be very, very dependable. And with the cathodic system, we're going to be talking 40 or 50 years, which, looking at the age of that, only a few of you will be left. So.
I want to share something before all of you leave the room. I've got some rack cards up here for a program that Alaska Heat Smart has called our North program, and it's our statewide nonprofit energy efficiency program. So we're through a DOE grant that we have, we're able to provide energy efficiency retrofits for about 20 to 30 nonprofit buildings around Alaska. These are nonprofits that work primarily in health and housing sectors. And they're eligible to get up to $150,000 from this program towards energy work, commercial audit, scope of work, construction management, and then actual energy efficiency work under the program. So we're striving for geographic diversity, looking across all of Alaska, Kenai Peninsula, and this area are not represented in the program yet. So if any of you know a potential nonprofit that could apply to it, that could use some cash to ideally save annual money and put it back into their mission, then we've got information here. You can take one of these with you or take a couple and pass them out, spread them around. Really appreciate the help in that.
One last question. Well, okay, this is a statement. Sorry. So a little quick research on the renewable energy program. It is for businesses. So it's the USDA agency that's going to supply funding for energy efficiency as well as alternative energy. So this is not supported under their alternative energy, but it is under their energy efficiency program. So if you're a business, a nonprofit, or a tribal entity, something like that, you'd qualify. So it might be worth, I was trying to look up the guy's name. There's a guy named Dan I met down in Kodiak, and he's doing a lot of work with tribes down there. So very active in the state as far as trying to get the word out. So they'd probably be awesome to work with.
All right, well, I want to say a huge thank you to all of our presenters tonight. Yeah, really, really valuable information shared. Thank you, Andy and Erin, for traveling to be here. And thank you everybody for coming. Like I said, I am going to send out that email with everyone's contact information, hopefully by Friday. If you don't get it by mid next week, my email is just satchel@inletkeeper.org, satchel like a bag, SATCHEL. And you can reach out to me if you're looking for these guys' information. Last thing I just feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't say is that, heat pumps are going to be more cost effective if our electric bills stay at least the rate they're at. I wouldn't say low, but at least stay steady. And that's only going to be achieved if our co-op is really working diligently to make sure we're getting the most affordable energy available to us, which means diversifying the grid. And Erin is, I would say, one of our most dedicated HEA board members advocating for that. And Erin is up for re-election to the board. These races are tight. The election won't come until March, but it's something to keep on your radar, to talk to your neighbors about. Really, if we lost Erin's voice on the board, it would be a disservice to all of us. She's also the only woman on the board. So I really encourage everyone to stay plugged in to what the work that HEA is doing. And if you'd like to help with Erin's campaign, that's another thing you can reach out to Inlet Keeper for. That said, I hope you guys are inspired to potentially make the move to heat pumps. I will say, like, the attendance makes me wonder a little bit about our labor capacity in Homer for heat pumps. I do know that there's another installer who has just moved to town from Southeast named John Howard, and maybe I'll include his information in the email I send out as well. He's doing mini splits, the air to air, and he's going to be servicing Seward and Homer. So, it's going to grow. I'm hoping that there's also money in the grants available for training. I don't. Is there money in the grants available for training?
Are there any other programs that are looking at training for development and finding the money for that?
Hopefully the demand will spur it. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your evening.